Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Catherine Moore McCallan, and I am the director of the UTRGV Center for Latin American Arts. I want to thank you all for coming today. This is a very exciting event for the theater department, the College of Fine Arts, and the university in general. We're very honored to have Mario Lamo back at UTRGV, and it is a real honor to have you visiting from Bogota, Colombia, and to give your talk today, Latin America Through the Eyes of a Playwright. And I wanted to briefly mention a few accolades and details from Mario Lamo's resume as we all think about our own academic pursuits and creative pursuits. Mario received his MA in Intercultural Administration from Brattleboro, Vermont, and his degree in anthropology from the Universidad de los Andes in Bogotá, Colombia. He has been the recipient of various prizes in theater, short story prizes, and notably from the Bienale de Novela José Eustacio in Nieva, Colombia. He was a finalist at the drama contest in the Letras de Oro from Miami University, as well as a finalist at the Tanata Cuentos in Spain in 2003. He is a well-published author with more than 5 books. Those include Todo por una tingua from the Autores y Editores in Bogotá, Colombia from 2013, and also Al Golpes de Huachuela y Otros Cuentos from Autores y Editores in Bogotá, Colombia from 2015. And his career has brought him to present plays on 4 continents. It's important to note that his own plays have been on stage by international groups in Europe, North America, Central and South America, including at the Compañía Teatral de Blanca Sosa in Hermosillo, Mexico in 2010, La Pinata Más Grande del Mundo. And we were very honored to have La Pinata Más Grande del Mundo at Edinburg in 2015 at UTRGV. That the Latino Theater Initiatives brought here. And Mario has also had his plays played at Teatro Amarte in Guatemala in 2018, as well as the Fundación Comunicarte in Venezuela in 2018. He is also the editor and publisher and has been the co-publisher for 12 years of the virtual literary magazine La Hojarasca, and it features hundreds of articles, interviews, poems, short stories, theater plays, and commentaries by writers from all over Latin America and Europe. And his literary works have been translated into English, Portuguese, and surprisingly enough, into Albanese. Also, I wanted to point out for everyone to please remember that the theater department and the Latino Theater Initiatives is presenting Mario Lamo's play, Little Big Top Circus of Illusions, tomorrow and Saturday at the Jeffers Theater, tomorrow, October 25th at 7 p.m., and Saturday, October 26th at 2 p.m., and the Jeffers Theater is in ELIBR South, the ELIBR South building, as you guys probably know. But I'd like to thank our colleagues from other departments, such as the Department of Biology and others around campus for attending this talk. And it is, again, a great honor to have Mario Lamo. So without further ado, I'd like you to all please join me in welcoming Mario.
Catherine, Dr. McCallan. Thank you very much for your introduction, and thank you to Dr. Wiley for inviting me here, and thank you for all of you to be attending this chat. I want to be more like a conversational history than a class about drama or something that you have to learn by heart. We're going to share some information today. Can you hear me okay? Hello? Okay. Okay, well, I'm an anthropologist and writer. And for the last 40 years, I've been traveling around Latin America, around the United States, Europe, and I trying to find commonalities among different people in different places. And maybe I am in a cave that eremite used in the 16th century in a church, a colonial church from South America, or maybe I'm high in the mountains of the Andean mountains, and I found something. People like to tell stories, no matter where we are. Here is part of one story, if we can play that little clip for a little bit. Thank you. Okay. So now we are in Ecuador, high in the mountains, and these are the Quichua people, an ancient people from South America, and they're performing one of their traditional dances. But the dance is not just a dance. The dance is telling us also a story. As you can see, it's a dance that is being performed by women, and they have their traditional costumes, but you see, they have something weird and don't belong to their tradition. They have a cross. So this is part of the syncretism that we find all over Latin America. And I got to spend 2 years with this Quichua community in Ecuador. And when I got to Ecuador, I got very surprised by their traditions. They were the same people that we had in Colombia a couple thousand of years ago, but with the not very welcome invasion from the Spanish. Many of our traditions were changed, and many people were just disappeared as a culture. One interesting thing about the Quichuas from Ecuador is that they didn't disappear as a culture. They integrated some of the elements of the Christian culture into their traditions, but they kept all their ways. Like, for example, if they had a wedding, they would go to a church and perform a Catholic wedding, but then they would go to their own hometown and dance for 3 days and make offers to their own gods. So the culture, the language, the traditions weren't lost. So this is one of the experiences that I wanted to share with you because it's part of what gave me the vision of the world that I have right now. I got to spend time also with people from the Amazonian jungle, and their culture and their lives are very different from whatever can imagine. Like I was taken to navigate a flooded jungle one morning, and they wanted just to show me a tree that produced honey. They call it the honey tree. But in reality, what they have was a lot of bees over there, and they wanted to collect some honey. But the person only took what he needed for that day, nothing else. Everything was left untouched. And then he navigated through the jungle that it was more difficult to navigate than the New York subway system. I was hoping that he knew how to get back. Yes, he did. Then we went back to the town, and he showed me what he had collected. He had collected some honey that we could drink immediately, and it's something that is not the honey that you get from the shelf anywhere in the world. Then they had to cook it and process it so it wouldn't rot or go bad. And then they used the wax from the bees to make candles. They just took a little piece of a rag from an old shirt, and they made a candle, and then they light the candle, and it was an aromatic candle. But there was something else. There were like little baby bees inside that piece of wax that he took, and he just put that in hooks, and the next day we went fishing. There was some type of fish that liked those baby bees. And he fished the most incredible fish that you can think. The taste was incredible, and he only took again what the people needed for that day. So everything was a cycle. So it gave me a different view of the world, of how people organize, a place where nobody went hungry, because if I went fishing and I didn't fish anything, I knew somebody else would have fished something. So nobody went hungry. And also, very important point, there was no money in that community. Everything was by barter, trading. So it was an exemplary community. There was some little detail. There were some missionaries from the United States that had arrived decades ago there, and they had a church, and they had like a priest or a pastor that performed a ceremony every Sunday. People attended that, but the rest of the week they went back to their own traditions. So those are two experiences that I wanted to share with you, that to show you the type of research that I have done and how I learned to look how important the small details are in everyday life or dealing with different cultures. Next one. Thank you. So we'll go a little bit into the literary part of Latin America. Latin America is a very diverse region, from Mexico to the South Cone to Argentina, Central America, South America, and we have had extraordinary writers that have shown our reality in different ways. I'm going to give just some examples. We have from Mexico, Juan Rulfo, an incredible writer. He wrote not very many pieces. He didn't write 1,000 of books, maybe one novel, 2 books of short stories, but is the writer that influenced the most the Latin American writers, because he reflected a Mexican reality in a way that no other writer was able to. They have had movies about his short stories, and when I read him, I was about 17. I was very impressed by his writings. Then we have in the South Cone, and you might have heard of him too, Jorge Luis Borges. He was the opposite of Rulfo. He was one author that was very, quotation mark, enlightened. He liked to write about the old classicals, but at the same time, being blind at 55, he wrote about labyrinths in life and how people arrive to these labyrinths and how they solve that. And in the middle of these two writers, we have another very interesting one. Siguiente. Gracias. Okay, thank you. This is a little quote by Borges, and it will give you like a taste of what he was like. I'm not sure that I exist actually. I am all the writers that I have read, all the people that I have met, all the women that I have loved, all the cities I have visited. Jorge Luis Borges. So that was the kind of thought that he had. Okay, next one. Okay, so we go now to, I think we missed one by Rulfo, but I'm not sure. Okay, yeah, it is. Thank you. Okay, here's another quote by Rulfo. There you'll find the place I love most in the world, the place where I grew thin from dreaming, my village, rising from the plain, shaded with trees and leaves, like a piggy bank filled with memories. You'll see why a person would want to live there forever. Dawn, morning, midday, night, all the same, except for the changes in the air. The air changes the color of things there, and life wears by as a quiet, as a murmur, the pure murmuring of life. And that's Juan Rulfo. And that's very important because that's the way he wrote his short stories, where just the air could change the color of everything. So that's a very poetic way to express his philosophy of life and of writing. Yeah, thank you. So we had Rulfo from Mexico, we have Borges from Argentina, and in the middle we have Gabriel García Márquez from Colombia. Gabriel García Márquez is a very special case because he started his life as a writer for a newspaper, and he used to write chronicles from a paper called El Espectador, and he got to interview people. And through interviewing people, he started listening to their stories. And he wrote early, that is called Relátago de un náufrago, that is like the narration of a guy that was in a shipwreck. And then he started writing different novels, short stories, until he got, like in the 70s, with this thing called magical realism. That was in his novel that he's holding on top of his head. He liked to take those kind of pictures, 100 Years of Solitude. Okay, we're going to have two quotes by Garcia Marquez now. Nobody deserves your tears, but whoever deserves them will not make you cry. So those were the type of contradictions that he would present through his writings and literature, and also like deep thinking about life. And here we have another one, maybe. Thank you. And this is being quoted by 1,000 times, but I think you'll find it interesting. Life is not what one lived, but what one remembers, and how one remembers it in order to recount it. And that's very important, because that was basically how Garcia Marquez saw life and how he recounted the events in the life of his family. Everything was inspired by the tales of his mother, grandmother, family in a small town in the Caribbean coast of Colombia. And then magical realism appeared in his works. We'll talk a little bit about what magical realism means. And this is an idea that in reality was not his. There were other writers writing about the same subjects before Garcia Marquez. And we could go back in time for centuries. But there was one particular writer in Colombia, his name was Rojas Erazo, that wrote 2 or 3 novels that if I give a piece of a novel of any of you, if you have read Garcia Marquez and I showed you the novel by this other guy, you couldn't tell the difference between the two of them. This Rojas Erazo, he basically invented all the magic word that Garcia Marquez was going to use later on. And what was the difference? That Rojas Erazo was full of metaphors, was very heavy to read, but Garcia Marquez popularized it. So he was the one who got the Nobel Prize. But he has this merit that he realized that the stories that he was listening from his family, from the townspeople, they had this strange flavor that created a different reality that was magical realism. So what is magical realism? Okay, so I'll just read what they say here. Magical realism or magic realism is an approach to literature that weaves fantasy and myth into everyday life. What's real, what's imaginary. In the world of magical realism, the ordinary becomes extraordinary and the magical becomes commonplace. I'll stop here. No, wait a second. Thank you. I'll stop here for 1 second. And this is like the definition that they are given in this particular place by somebody that is studying Garcia Márquez literature. The important point here is that it's not just literature, it's everyday life in Colombia. And that's that magical realism, we find it and we'll explore it through the other literary works that we're going to talk about. So we'll continue. Also known as marvelous realism or fantastic realism, magical realism is not a style or a genre, so much as a way of questioning the nature of reality. In books, stories, poetry, plays, and film, factual narrative and far-flung fantasies combine to reveal insights about society and human nature. The term magic and realism is also associated with realistic and figurative artworks, paintings, drawings, sculptures that suggest hidden meanings. And that's very important. We'll go back to hidden meanings later. Lifelike images such as the Frida Kahlo portrait show above, I don't think we have the portrait, taking on an air of mystery and enchantment. Thank you. So, you will be wondering now about magical realism and how that is presented in the work of Garcia Márquez. And in reality, it's not just the work of Garcia Márquez. It's a way to see reality in which you can see like any ordinary event can become a magical one. And I've seen that, like, for example, with vendors in the streets. You have a vendor that comes trying to sell a product, and they are chanting, they have a special chant, and all of a sudden, your street becomes part of that magical realism, because there's somebody chanting that they have some delicious food that will bring happiness to you. And when you see that it's not an ordinary event, you see the ordinary as an extraordinary, then you start thinking, why? What is extraordinary about this? Then you see, for example, the person is selling tamales, and the tamales in Colombia, they have, for example, banana leaves, and there is a woman that is walking with her daughter, and nobody is buying anything. So I asked to myself, well, I'd like to try one of those tamales, and I go back, go to the street, buy one of the tamales, and all of a sudden, people all over the street are looking through their windows, peeking through doors, and they say, well, that person there bought one, they might be good. And all of a sudden, everybody comes out and buy those tamales, and this little girl and her mother are out of tamales. So this is a very ordinary event. It's like it could happen 1,000 times in 1,000 of streets, but all of a sudden, just one little change in direction makes that's an event that she will never forget for the rest of his life. And that's one of the techniques like Garcia Márquez uses in his novels. Like, for example, when he starts 100 Years of Solitude, he talks about the character that would never forget when his grandfather took him to know the ice. So there you have like a very ordinary event, ice, getting to know the ice. But in the words of Garcia Márquez, finding what ice is in a town of the Caribbean where people would seldom see ice is an extraordinary event. And there are 1,000 examples for about that. For example, in literature, there's the story of one old fish that is swimming, and he sees the young fish coming to him, and he asks the young fish, "How is the water today?" Very simple question. And the young fish asks, "What is water?" So there is where we are. We are in the water, but we are not asking that questions ourselves. What is water? And those are the type of questions that Garcia Marquez was asking through his literary work. Okay, thank you. Okay, so when I started writing many decades ago, I did it because not because I wanted to be famous or because I feel that that was something very important to be a writer. It happened that my mother used to like poetry, and she was always reciting a poem about a boyfriend that she had had in her youth. And I had listened to her poem for 10 years. I was 16 and at the time, and I said, well, I bet I can write a better poem. So I started writing and writing until I think this poem might work. I sent it to a literary magazine, and surprise, it was published. It was the 17th of August of 1969. So that's the way that I discovered that I could write poetry inspired by the poetry that my mother was reciting all the time. But also, my mother was an incredible narrator. She would keep telling stories from her youth over and over the years. So I started recording her when I became an anthropologist. I wanted to study my own mother. So, but most of all, I wanted to hear her stories. This plays a little bit. Is it just a picture? Or? Or we can go to the next one. Well, this is one of the interviews that I was doing with my mother, and if we go to the next one, reality, well. Okay, we can go to the next one. So I spent like 10 years interviewing my mother just to get her stories, and she always repeat the same stories in a very peculiar way, because she was not only telling the stories, she is at her old age still telling me stories. And the incredible part of the stories is that she had this incredible memory. She could retell a story from 60 or 70 years ago and recall it the same way every time. But not only that, she would act the voices of the people that she was talking with. And also her description of the people were very vivid. Like, for example, she told me the story of this is a small town, 1930s, and there is neighbors that like gossip. So she's going to get married. She doesn't want the neighbors to attend the wedding because she doesn't want them gossiping about what she was wearing or whatever. So she said, my wedding is on the 29th of June. And they send the invitations for the 29th of June. But she says, no, we're going to marry on the 28th at 5 in the morning, so the neighbors won't be there. So everything goes as planned. They have to get the groom to his hotel because he forgot about his wedding and he's not arriving. Finally, everybody gets to the wedding starts, and she starts a narration. Then when we were in the middle of the wedding, we heard the shoes of somebody knocking against the floor of the church, and there was the gossipy neighbor. She arrived anyhow to the wedding. So I put together his stories, and I wrote a book about that, and if I can find it quickly. Okay, and this is the book. It's a novel, and it tells just how she met my father and how they got married. But it was not any way that they do it today. It was a very different way. So it's like a time capsule of how people fell in love at the beginning of the last century, which is very different from today. And it is through the story I could learn more about myself, my father, my family, and also enjoying again all what she had told me about her life. And this is called Con el puñal de tu mirada pura. Somebody that can help me to translate that into English. With what? It's like puñal is like a sword. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is a poem that is in here, and this is part of the poem that she used to repeat, and that's why I wanted to write a poem. So we can go to the next one. No, that's fine. That's okay. So that's just a picture of the time of the novel. There is my mother with his my father and my grandfather and my grandmother. And that was at the beginning of the century. So we can go to the next one. Thank you. So this is the book that I just showed you. And that's the important thing, that for us, magical realism begins at home. And I wanted to dedicate this to the memory of my mother, the most beautiful of the memories. And this is a play with words, because here the memory play this important part. Without this incredible memory, I would have never learned all these stories. And also the other part is that her memories became part of my memories. So I could remember now the lines that she said, and I could tell you what happened and how the people looked like and what happened at the 5 in the morning in that church. So I think that's very important, because it was for me part of this magical realism, having somebody at home that could recall all these incredible stories. And then I wrote this. This was my second novel. It's a very short novel. Okay, next one. So, now we go into theater. This was just an introduction to tell you why I like to write, and I hope I gave you some idea. But theater was a different thing. I enjoy acting since I was very young. When I was about 7, I acted in a play, and I thought that was fantastic. Then when I was 16, I created my own theater group in the neighborhood. And when I entered the university, the first thing that I did was got into the theater group. I was studying engineering when I entered the university, but there was a conflict. And this was the conflict. Engineering took too much time and was taking time from my acting. So I decided to change careers. So I decided to study anthropology, because that way I could study other people and I could act and just go to present the tests. And that's the way I became an anthropologist. anthropologist. But what I was really studying was theater. And that's what I was doing at the university. So it was an incredible time. It was the 1970s. There was a lot of social revolt in Latin America. People were questioning everything under the sun. And one of the ways to question your reality was theater. And although that was not my idea of theater, when I started working with this theater group at my university, it was University de los Andes in Bogotá, Colombia, we started creating our own plays. So we used to get together 2 or 3 of the actors and write a play, sit in our house and write until 3 in the morning until we created a script. And we performed that script. Then we started creating like improvisational plays and went around the country showing these plays. And that was very interesting because you got to go to a town and instead of asking the people to go to the theater, we went to the peoples directly. I remember a particular town that we went to, and we had like hundreds of people there seeing one of our plays. And then later, years later, when I was here in the States, one day that town disappeared. There was a volcano nearby, and they told the people they had to move, but they didn't do it with enough, effort. And people just stayed there, and they got covered by mud. But that was one town where I remember performing a particular play. And this is part also like of maybe Latin American, Colombian reality. Like you can have something that exists, and the next day is completely gone. It's just history. So that's other of the memories. So I'm gonna go just into a couple of the plays there's 5 plays there. One of the plays that was performed here is called La Piñata Más Grande del Mundo, the biggest piñata in the world. That play received a prize by what is now the Colombian Ministry of Culture, and the other plays, as Catherine mentioned, is called Héroes sin Guerra, and that was a finalist in the University of Miami Letra de Oro. It's the only time that I have sent any plays to a contest. And there was some results. So can we go to the next one? Thank you. Okay. I was going to talk a little bit more about the other play. So we'll leave this there on hold. This play, Immigrant to Winter, was based on a real story. I had to go to the US Embassy to get a visa. I guess many people have had that experience, a lot of immigrants. And well, I was married to a US citizen, so they just have to give it to me. So I wasn't concerned about not getting it. But there was a big line of people very worried about if they were going to get the visa or not. So people were talking about the desires to migrate, why they wanted to come to the States. And there were like a whole dynamics there, just in the people waiting to see if they could get a visa. Like, for example, given the conditions of Latin America, that people are always looking, like there's no full employment and people are always looking for odd jobs. So one odd job that a person had was to get there at 5 in the morning. He was the first in line. And when somebody came late, he would sell his position in line. And that's how he made a living. There was another person that was selling like cosmetic products. So the line was a source for many things. People that were doing business, people that were helping others to complete forms. And then you heard all the experiences of all these people. So I was just there waiting, I'm going to get a visa. But then all these stories were fantastic because everybody was telling a different story. And there was, like, for example, a couple that came to adopt a child. And it results that they had like association that would practically sell the children for money, and that was not known at the time. And also, like, all the dynamics inside the embassy were awkward, like the type of questioning that people, the questions that people had to respond. And there was one particular question that I wrote about in the play that it sounded very funny to me. Is your intention to come to the United States to overthrow the legitimate government? So I revised, and 40 years later, they keep asking the same question. I don't know if somebody that has that intention would answer yes. But we have to trust that people will say the truth sometime. I don't know if you're familiar with the películas of Cantinflas. Anybody? Okay. So, who have seen For Mis Pistolas? Okay, well, there is a movie where Cantinflas have to cross the border. And it's a very funny movie. And he's like a guy that sells drugs in a pharmacy, but he has an inheritance and he has to go to the United States. And he goes to the border, and the border is just a door, and there's nothing in one side or the other, but the guard insists that he has to go through the gate. But there's no way to open the gate because the guy doesn't have the keys. So Cantinflas has some fake keys, and he managed to open the border and crosses. And they ask him, are you here to overthrow the government of the United States? And that was like in the 1930s or something like that. And he says, well, so if I overthrow the government, who's going to give us the money? So that's part of the story. So now we go to the biggest piñata in the world that was performed here by Latino theater initiatives. This is a play that I wrote. I'm going to talk a little bit about the origins of that play. Can we advance one? Thank you. And I think you can. So what she was basically saying is that she was looking for a play for children. She was looking for a colorful play. And then she found La Piñata Más Grande del Mundo, and she was very interested in the play. She asked Rosalia. She wanted to tell her about the play that she had found, and Rosalia had found the same play at the same time. So that's the way they decided to put this play on stage. And well, the interesting part is that all my literary work is for sale in books, but it's also for free in the internet. I believe that people have the right to read, and I don't need to profit from anything that I have written. So all the works are performed or are royalty free. I don't charge anything, and people are just free to perform, because I think that's the way that, going back to my first presentation about life in the jungle, I don't believe in creating commodities with literary works. They are like the fish that you find through serendipity or that you find one day in the jungle and you share with people. And that's the way you can enjoy them. And if somebody is thirsty for literature, will find it the same way that people might be hungry for food. So the story of the Pinata is based on a real life event. I moved to the States. I was living in Washington, D.C. Since I'm an anthropologist, I was very interested in the Smithsonian Institution, the largest complex of museums in the world. And also they have what is called a folk life festival. So it was perfect because they were bringing people from different cultures there and performing. And what were they performing? They were performing, showing like their skills, cooking skills, handcraft, music, ceremonies. And one year, Mexico was the special guest. So they brought people with different handcrafts. They knew people that knew how to cook, others were like dancers. And at that time, I was the director of volunteers there because I wanted to know the people. So I had to stay with one of the presenters. His name was Cipriano Cedillo. He came from Laredo, Texas. And I didn't even know about Laredo. But he was quite a character. I immediately knew that he was somebody that was so devoted to his handcraft and the way he was creating the piñatas. I had never seen anybody fabricate a piñata, but I stayed day after day with him and I saw all the elements that he needed to create a piñata. So he had certain piñatas that he would like to create. He had a barquito de papel, the little paper. Then he has the Wonder Woman, he had the donkey, and he also was creating the biggest piñata in the world, according to his own words. Those were the times of Ronald Reagan, and he was making a huge piñata of Ronald Reagan. It was very interesting because I saw the possibility, to work, to do some type of fiction work with the work that he was doing. So what I did is, through what I had learned about the piñatas, I decided to give life to these characters in a play. First, I started with a short story. And the short story told the life of the story of how the piñatas came alive without Cipriano noticing that. And also, there was some interesting thing. Then I decided to do a theater play. And also, the theater play had to be written in verse. Why not? That's what I had written for all my life. So that's what I did, and I sent it to a contest, and it got a prize there. But one of the important things about the piñatas is that revising the literature and plays and blah, 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 nobody had written any story involving piñatas directly or a theater play with piñatas. So that was one of the interesting things, like seeing like an ordinary day event, a guy making piñatas. Yeah, people will go by and look, yes, he's making piñatas, blah, blah, blah. But what about if these piñatas had a relationship among them and they become alive and all of a sudden Cipriano is dancing with Wonder Woman and the president becomes the bad guy and the piñatas revolt. So, so a whole story came out just of this piñata maker from Laredo, Mexico. He was also a cook, and he was a fantastic character. So that's the play. I put it in again for free, and that's the way Maria and Rosalia found the play. And let's go to the next one. Thank you. Okay, we can play. So this is one of the Mexican performances, and that's Cipriano. Okay, so that was part of the Mexican performance. I was telling Dr. Wiley on our way here, I didn't write that part. The Mexican group did it. They did a marvelous song because they wrote music for the other songs that I had written. But then I included something similar. I didn't copy their stuff, but they did a wonderful job. Can we go to it? Yes, thank you. And well, little story about the piñatas. There's a story everywhere. We see the piñatas and wow, what is the origin? Originated in China, brought to Italy by Marco Polo. The Italian word piñata, which translates into clay pot, is the most probable etymology of the word, as the original piñatas were fashioned in clay. Okay, so that's an interesting... It's 6 o'clock, thank you. Do we still have time? Okay. Okay, can I continue? Yes, sir. Okay, thank you. No, I mean, if it's I'm not going too long.
It's trying to help me stay punctual.
Okay. Okay, so can you go to the next one? Thank you. Okay, so this was an extraordinary coincidence because in Mexico, a clay pot filled with fruit, candy, or small toys, suspended piñatas are the central component to any Mexican birthday celebration. While most people think of them as fun activities, piñata go beyond playing. Here it repeats the part about the Asian origin and how they were brought to Italy and from Italy to Spain and adapted for the celebration of Lent. Can we go to the next one? Thank you. But here is the important part, because there was also a pre-Columbian tradition very similar to the piñatas. The Aztecs would fill a clay jar with offerings and decorate it with colorful feathers. They would break the jug in celebration of the Aztec god of war, Huitzilopochtli, excuse me, my bad pronunciation. When the piñatas were broken, the treasures could fall on the god's feet as an offering. Similarly, the Mayans playing a game in which the player's eyes were covered while hitting a suspended clay pot by a string. Thus, the Spanish missionaries used these pre-existing traditions to instill a religious conversion. So here we have a cultural element, a traveling cultural element from many continents, and many things had to happen for this cultural element to get here to Latin America. Well, one okay, so here we have the chain of events. First, we needed the Chinese to invent the piñatas. Okay. Then we needed Marco Polo to go to China and bring the piñatas to Italy. And then we needed the Spaniards to come to what was not known at the time as America. And also we needed the Mexicans to adopt this like art and diversion. And the other thing that we needed was this guy named Cipriano Cedillo from Laredo to go to the Smithsonian to demonstrate his piñatas. And by chance, I was there to watch him making those piñatas. So the Chinese never imagined when they started with the piñatas that sometimes they would end up in a theater play. Okay. So I have continued to write many different things, other theater plays. I won't talk about all the theater plays because it's better to watch them than to hear what the theater plays is about. But just through listening to stories of people is that I have like created many different works of literature, the stories from my mother, or other stories from books, other stories interviewing people about, for example, their traditions, and I discovered many things that people don't talk about because they won't tell their stories unless they show that you're not going to publicize what they say, so everything becomes like fiction. And there is a book also that I wrote, is called Viaje al País de las Nubes, is this book. And this book became a theater play also in Portugal. I thought it was impossible to put that on a stage, but they did it. I don't know if I have a clip of there. Let's see. Okay, that one, thank you.
Uma vez, em fico muito longe, vi chover sumos de morango. E com esse sumo, formou-se lado de limonada.
Limonada de morango? Não, nós queremos ir lá.
Quero início de conquista, pra que nunca desista, de me tornar alquimista, futuro optimista, dando as mãos a todo mundo, sem parar segundo que desejo que me cerca.
This play was based on a short story that I wrote. It was like a trip, a magical trip to the geography of Latin America. And I was inspired by my life in the jungle and what I learned from the people there. Like, for example, they believe that dolphins were more like human beings and they wouldn't harm dolphins. And they told me that dolphins sometimes would come out of their city under the water and would marry the woman and would take her to that city. So in this story, I use that topic where the children are traveling, looking for a cloudland, the place where the clouds come from. They have a grandfather that tells them stories. And in one of their stories becomes reality, and they start this trip. So they visit this fantastic city under the river, where they get to meet all these dolphins that in reality exist in the Amazonian jungle. They're very peaceful and playful. And I was in a canoe there. They would just keep us company and travel with us. So this one play, like one story from the jungle, became a short story and then a theater play in Portugal. Next. So we go back in time a little bit, because when the Spanish arrived, there were a lot of rituals, a lot of performances, musicians, people that were telling stories. Most of it has been lost. We have some stories told in museums, waiting to be rediscovered and told. This is, for example, one that is in the Gold Museum in Bogotá, where the chief of the Muiscas would dress, was naked, covered with gold, and he would go into a lake. and he would bring a lot of gold presents for the gods, and he would go to the middle of the lake, and he then would swim into the lake, and they will throw all this gold into the lake. So when the Spanish arrived, they saw gold everywhere. And as I think I mentioned before, gold was an object for decoration or for ceremonies to be given to the gods. It didn't have monetary value. And we have in Bogota the Gold Museum, where we have incredible works of art that somehow were preserved because the Spanish just melted most of the gold that they found because they just wanted gold. They were not interested in the artistic part. Here, like you have like this raft that is even missing a piece here, and you have some of the warriors, and you have the sipa or king riding here. And the story goes, the Spanish wanted the gold, so they follow this king sipa called Guatavita. They follow him to the lake, and what he did was he just threw everything that he had of value in the lake, and the gold magically disappeared. And well, but I think that was a very nice trick because he never did that. He took it somewhere else. But the Spanish went there and they dried the lake, and they didn't find anything. And that's how the legenda of El Dorado started. When the Spanish arrived, they see like this gold is everywhere, but it's not because people are rich because of the gold. They're rich because they live a healthy life, because they live in communities that support each other, and these are ceremonial or art objects. One more. Thank you. Okay, now we go to something that you might be interested about. Well, I continue researching, and I think I always looking for stories. Wherever I go, I listen to what the people have to say. So I decided to go to a convent, a 16th century convent, just to listen what the story was there. I went without any expectation, just to listen to the people. And this is called a cacheton with big cheeks. And he is in the roof of a 16th century church, and I'll tell you about this story, a little bit about this story. Can we go to the next one? Thank you. Okay, so this isn't we'll show don't worry, we'll show the church in a little while. This is like high in the roof of the church, and what I found there is that all these magnificent churches and these magnificent gold pieces were not done by the Spanish people. They have slaves, and the slaves were our Muisca people, and they had to build them churches, houses. They have to grow them crops, do absolutely everything for them because they were slaves. But in this particular piece, instead of having a god in the ceiling of the church, they put one of the divinities there. That is the god's son. That's what they got, and also it doesn't look like a Spanish person. And that's the way like they assimilated but revolt at the same time, because they did everything that they told to do exactly the way they wanted it. Can we see another one? Okay. And here we have, looks a little bit like La Virgen de Guadalupe, but it's La Milagrosa. We have many virgins in Latin America, as you know it, and they appear in different parts. They say that this virgin appeared in that town that I was investigating, and is there at the church, and it's very elaborated. You can see it has all like the sun rays around here, and there is a particular place where they say that this virgin appeared, like the Virgin of Guadalupe, Virgin of Fatima. This is like an old tradition. this could be, I don't want to be irreverent, but this could be part of magical realism as well. Can we go to the next one? Okay, and here is the town. It's called Tunja. This is the center of Colombia. It's a colonial town founded like in the 16th century, and it has the most incredible amount of churches from the 16th century that you can imagine, with one particular problem. The termites are eating the gold away from all the ornaments in the churches. So I visited this convent, and we'll see a little bit about the convent. Can we go about the next one? And this is the church. It's like a small cathedral. That's what it represents. And you can have seen like the bishop's mitra there, and it's not very clear here, but this is full of 16th century art, and everything is gold plated or painted with gold, and is basically now abandoned by the church, and is in the middle of being a museum, and people can go to visit it, but what they really want is to dismantle the church and sell everything by pieces. So when I went there, I was told that, so I'm producing a video just so people can see this magnificent place, and the church that wants to take charge of this and sell each piece by itself is not allowed to do that if it's declared a national monument. And this is, well, the altar, and here we have all this. You can see everything is gold plated. And here we have some of the figures that are in the roof of or around the church. And again, you can see all the different elements like the gold, the sun around the head, and they really changed the way the Spanish would see their, from the Barroco times, this type of art. Okay. And this is the story here, of this convent. There was a Spanish couple. The guy was an encomendero. It means a man that owns a lot of land. He had like about 3,000 slaves, as I mentioned before. When they got to their old age, they didn't have any children, but they had a lot of money. So the man decided to become a Franciscan priest, and the woman created a special order for women, and was the first order in El Nuevo Reino de Granada in Latin America that was for women. But here, the women weren't at this time allowed to learn to read or write. And one woman arrives to this convent that she knows how to read and write. And she starts teaching the other ones, and she becomes a writer, and a very interesting writer, because she has all these experiences that can fall in the field of what we've been talking about, magical things. Like she narrates how demons would come to her at night and take her to the dark places, and how angels would take her to her room in the morning. And she was a prolific writer. She wrote 2 books, one about her life, and another book called Affectos. And those affectos were about her relationship with God, with Jesus Christ, concretely, because all these women at this convent were supposed to be the wives of Christ. And she took it very seriously, because some of the poems are very erotic. So, but there are very few published. Excuse me. So there is a fascinating story that I want to write about, and it's the life of that woman. because just by being in that convent, you can see like the room where she would used to torture herself using like whips and special cords with pieces of metal, and how she was tormented because she was not good enough for Christ. And she would write, and she got to a point where she didn't have any more paper to write. So she started writing on the walls and with big letters. So some investigator went there and with some black light started seeing the poems written in the walls. And they started to peel other parts of the convent, and new things appeared in the walls that like frescoes that they weren't seen before. Now, in the room of the encomendero, they had the muiscas paint some artwork. So they painted a very intricate things like this, very elaborated, that goes, it's like maybe a room half this size, and if you had 2 or 3 feet of the border against the roof, it will be painted all around. So what people usually do, they go into this place, they look at the paintings, and they leave. And that is what has happened for the last almost 5,000 years. 500, excuse me. Okay, I need more water. So I was with another friend there, and I started looking at this particular drawing that had been seen by thousands of people. And there was this face here that belongs to a feline animal that is right here, like he's on top of some branch or something, and he has some horns. That wasn't supposed to be there because these very religious Catholic people didn't ask the painters to paint demons in there, obviously. There's more about that painting, and we'll discuss it at another time. So we can go to the next one. Thank you. That's just a color version of the painting. Okay, and we go to this last part is about the Gold Museum, and it's about the different masks that are in this Gold Museum. They represent art, they represent people, they represent all the artisans that at that time were creating masks for the gods, for offerings. And I saw obviously the mask, but I saw also the opportunity to bring to life these masks. So that's why my next play will be about. It will be about these people that were behind those masks, and I'll create a play where the characters will come alive from this museum, like the Pinatas. Maybe we can see some other of the masks. Thank you. Well, this is not the mask, but this is from a different part of Colombia. This is called epoporo. It's a very elaborated piece of gold, and they use it to mix coca leaves here with other elements just to chew it. But it shows the utilitarian and beautiful way that they elaborated an everyday object that was you couldn't buy in a shop, or the person wouldn't have it because it was very expensive. It was a different mindset. Okay, and this is a particular mask that I found very interesting because it's like very deep. The eyes, the features, and this is one of the masks that I'm gonna use in the play. There's no like any literature or studies about what for these masks were produced, or if they actually used them into some type of ceremony. We just know that they existed. And we're coming to the end. This is, I've traveled through many places to talk to many people, to learn many stories, travel by train, by plane, by boat, walking, just to listen to what people have to say. And I think that's the most important thing. Even if you are driving a cab in your own city and you find a person that wants to tell you a story, maybe there's something interesting there to listen about. By the way, I wrote a whole story about some story that a cab driver told me, and it's very interesting. Next one, thank you. So this is me just arriving here, and when I wrote this story about cloud land, I was inspired by the clouds that I saw from the airplanes. So everything, there is an opportunity to create something from what you are experiencing. And one more, thank you. And this comes to the end of my presentation. This is Ecuador. They're playing in the street in front of a museum. It's like 10 p.m. There's no public. They're playing for the fun of it, because it's beautiful, because you can enjoy it. And the girl with the hat and the green handkerchief is my daughter. And this guy here, now over here, is playing an instrument that had disappeared for hundreds of years. And they recovered in there that instrument. And this museum is just dedicated to the study of the ancient music from Ecuador. And that's the director of the museum. He is not a director that will sit in his desk waiting for what's going to happen. He's a director that goes out to play and also walks around the town and talks to the people and brings them to the museum. So that's one of the beautiful things about learning from other cultures, from other people, that you get to share with them, to talk to them, to get the stories. And for me, that's the most important thing that I wanted to communicate today, that by talking, traveling, listening, looking for characters that have something special about their lives, or maybe everyday characters that have something presented in a different way. You can create a world, a fantasy. But what is the important thing of this world, of this fantasy? It shows you that you can create an alternate reality. And that reality can become a reality in itself, because you're bringing to life all traditions, all the stories, and you're bringing all what your ancestors wanted to communicate with you through music, through stories, from the Pinata from China that came through Italy to Spain to Mexico. There is a chain there, and I think it's very important. One important that I learned, this play was performed in Guatemala, and there I learned a lot about the Mayan culture. One of the most important things was their conception of the universe, that in the universe is like something that is woven, like you have some strings, and you're weaving your own universe, and where you're presenting with this string, there is a choice, an option, and you decide to take it. You're part of the fabric of the universe. So now what I see is how to weave the universe through stories that could be from different parts of the world and what they represent. So by being in these places, I'm just telling the universe, here I am, you just tell me what you want me to tell the other people about. Thank you very much. Any questions? Is there time? Is there time? Sure.
So, I mean, from what was it, 76? Oh. So from 1976, you have like 43 years of experience, and that was like your first play that was your own play that was put on like on an international level. What can you say is like your most what like if there was one piece of advice you could give, like us students about, if we want to create something, whether it's a play or like film or just as far as like our creative outlets, what can you tell us as advice?
That's a very, very good question. The first thing is that the first formula is that there's no formulas, and that's very important. Like you can, like for example, after the Garcia Marquez boom, everybody started writing like Garcia Marquez, and I was disgusted because I said that's crazy. Why are they have to imitate Garcia Marquez? That lack of creativity, right? You have to create your own identity, your own way of seeing the world, your own way to express things. And you have to find your own voice. I think that's the most important part. And the other one is that you have to observe a lot and talk to people and listen to people and look to details. Like sometimes the details are more important than the main things that you are looking at. Like for example, in the example of the church was big, full of gold, but there were those details in those paintings, and that's what I look at. And I didn't tell you the rest of the story, but it's very interesting. I don't know if I should tell you. What do you think, Eric? Okay, so whoever wants to stay, I'll tell you the rest of the story. But that's my advice is, be absolutely original. Be yourself. Be yourself how you see it, and don't be like anybody else. Don't try to follow any patterns or any advice of how to write or how not to write. Improvise a lot. Be very critical of yourself. Be your worst critic. Thank you.